The Starr and D'Amico Show brought to you by cheapesttshirts.ca. Need blanks for your next event or club? Check out cheapesttshirts.ca. No minimum order, free shipping over $350. Same-day shipping on lots of items. Affordable, Canadian, ready to print your design. Brought to you by Catherine Prince at Remax Platine, your Montreal real estate connection. Call her at 514-702-2474 or email Catherine with a K, Catherine at catherineprince.com. If you're looking to buy, sell, or invest with confidence, Catherine Prince, your key to the city's property market. Brought to you by McLean's Pub. Looking for a lively downtown spot with great food and atmosphere? Come to McLean's Pub on Peel Street. Classic pub eats, plenty of beer, and all the sports on all the screens. Grab your friends and make McLean's your go-to place tonight. Brought to you by Cabletel, your full-service telecom partner for business and home. From structured cabling and phone systems to Wi-Fi, cameras, and alarms, Cabletel keeps you connected, secure, and performing at your best. Your partner for the future. It's Cabletel. Welcome to Friday, everybody. Good to see you all back here after the Montreal Canadiens began the first half of the marathon of the month of December. There's Marco D'Amico with RG Media. I'm Shaun Starr. And don't forget, you can find Marco on RG. You can find him on Habs Breakfast every Wednesday on TSN 690. You can find the best in pet needs, pet supplies, pet food, pet advice at Little Bear on St. Catherine, across from Westmount Square. Chuck and Evie and the family-owned business care about your pet as much as you do. And if you're looking for the Christmas gifts, stocking stuffers, even I had some questions about my dog. My dog's a potato. He hates the wintertime. He gets a little chunky in the winter months because he doesn't want to go anywhere. I wanted to ask about low carb food. Apparently it's not a good idea, but you see what I'm getting at? Good advice from a family-owned business at Little Bear. Marco, good to see you as the Montreal Canadiens off that shootout win at home against Winnipeg have won 4 of 6. You know, the Montreal Canadiens are always looking to add, Marco, in the non-existent trade market. Dun, dun, dun. Is Kiefer Sherwood on their radar? This not so much young man. He's 31 years young and looking for an opportunity. And is Montreal the market that could give him that opportunity, as his name is swirling around lately?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there's a lot to like with Sherwood, and then there's a lot of red flags. It's a little bit of a give and take situation. I think in a vacuum, he presents the Canadians with a lot of what they're missing right now: that grit, that nose for the net, the ability to play with intensity in a bottom to middle six role. A lot of what the Canadians are missing right now from a Josh Anderson type, for example. And I don't think he necessarily plays with the speed of a Josh Anderson at top speed, but what he does make up for it with good hockey sense. So I think that Sherwood is, Vancouver's best trade chip right now in terms of, the being able to make a move before the December trade freeze on the 20th. From what I'm being told, the Canadians have inquired, right? Like, can't confirm. It's been reported by other outlets as well. Canadians have inquired. They're one of the more interested teams. But again, when you look at a guy like Sherwood, in a nutshell, yes, I think he's fine. But this is also a player that's looking to cash in this summer. From what I'm being told out in Vancouver, the ask is somewhere in the $5 million range for a long-term contract. As Shaun alluded to, he'll be 31 at the end of his current deal that pays him $1.5 million. So I think he would be a good get in terms of his style and what he brings, but then there are considerable red flags to keep in mind as we go through the evaluation of the player and what the Canadians need, because there is the notion that the Canadians aren't in a win now scenario, and there are teams that are in a win now scenario that could use a Kiefer Sherwood and are probably more apt to go and get him as a pure rental than the Canadians, who, yes, they have 2 second-round picks. Yes, they have prospects. But is this really the right time to go for this kind of player?
I'd like to expand on the red flags and, get into a little bit more detail there. But for those that aren't, watching a lot of West Coast hockey, it's, he played a full season more or less, save 4 games last year with the Vancouver Canucks, had 40 points and 19 goals. Through 27 games, he's on 16 points and 12 goals. This is not someone that takes, an abundance of penalty minutes. But I'm curious about in the hypothetical world that exists, like on the surface, I don't think I'm in favor of looking at a 30, soon to be 31-year-old and locking him up to the foreseeable future on a long-term deal for a young hockey club that is trying to pry open their window of winning in terms of contending in the East, looking at Stanley Cups and the path towards that. I'm not so sure the timeline fits, but who am I to say? What if Kent Hughes and Jeff Gordon strongly disagree and they put an offer on the table? Like, what role does he play? Whose role does he take over in this hypothetical world where Kiefer Sherwood, presto, becomes a Montreal Canadien?
I think as a pure rental, it makes sense, but I don't think it makes sense for them to acquire him and try to extend him
Right.
to what he's asking for. If he's able, if the ask comes down, then that's fine. I think he's being put in a position with Vancouver now where he's playing in situations that more or less will not be available when the Canadians, higher end prospects join the roster.
Yeah.
He just brings an element that's not there. And I think that's what's attractive. That's what works for me. But the issue with those players, the same way that Mark Bergevin kind of got backed up into a corner looking for that unicorn type player in Josh Anderson, is they're rare and they generally want term when they get to this. Remember Josh Anderson? When the Canadians traded for him, it was either he was signing a 1 year deal and walking straight into free agency, or you sign him to a 7-year deal. It was one or the other. There was no in between. And the Canadians opted for a 7-year deal. And, Josh Anderson's $5.5 million contract right now, the Canadians aren't contending, so it's not that big of an issue. But if they were, it would be a pretty big anchor when you consider that and Brendan Gallagher's $6.5 million. So for a general manager that's done so well in being able to keep his books in order for the long-term future, to be able to go and get the pieces that he needs, I don't know that throwing $5+ million at this player to keep him in Montreal after an acquisition like that is necessarily the wisest of moves when you see that, you're getting a Lane Hudson at 8.85. Now, granted, one is a free agent, the other one is an unrestricted free agent, but, even with the Noah Dobson situation, like Dobson actually, the price came down to sign in Montreal. It would be interesting to see if Sherwood would bring his price down if the Canadians were ever to acquire him. But if the ask is in the 5 million, when it's a physical winger on the wrong side of 30, going to be 31 at the end of this deal, who wants a long-term contract, it's a recipe for me for regret. I think that you could find players of this type on free agency through trade if necessary. And I think that because of his peak, because of the style that he is and the opportunity that he's getting in on a team like Vancouver, I don't necessarily think that he would get those kinds of opportunities in Montreal, especially when guys like Newhook and Kirby Dach come back. He would play probably a third line role, the similar kind of role, not the similar style, but a similar kind of role to Alex Texier right now. And so to throw, I wouldn't say significant, but to throw draft capital like a second round pick for Sherwood and potentially lose him for nothing is one thing, right? Like that could be problematic as well. It would be to me a knee jerk reaction. Like it's okay to be interested. Teams always check in. Teams are always interested. Teams are always want to see what the field is like. But if it costs the Canadians theirs or Columbus's second round pick, I don't know that it would sit well with me necessarily, just because I feel like you could do more with that pick on the trade market.
Right.
And right now, Sherwood's value is at its peak. So the
Mm-hmm.
Canadians would be buying high. I just don't know if that's their kind of move at this stage of their rebuild. He would help. The leadership would help. The physical play would help. The nose for the net would help. He would be an option for secondary scoring. It checks a lot of boxes. But then the business side comes in, and you're like, would the Canadians be needlessly boxing themselves into another cap problem by going to get him? Because I wouldn't fathom that the Montreal Canadiens would make a trade for a pure rental at this stage. I think that they would be more apt to try and make a hockey deal and try to bring in a piece that's going to be able to help this team, move forward, rather than just sacrificing what is probably going to be a good second round pick this year, in a deeper draft, as I'm being told, for help that would only be, 3 to 5 months. I personally, I would find it weird to see it happen.
What about trying to find answers, right? You saw, this past week with the Canadiens losing to Ottawa, bouncing back with a 3-2 shootout win over the Winnipeg Jets. Martin St. Louis shook the lines up. Alex Tessier moves up to the Kapanen and Demidov line. Zach Bolduc drops from line 1 to line 4, barely plays any minutes after not actually getting called out, but kind of getting called out for the lack of defensive awareness. Looking at a world where what's Patrick Laine's future in Montreal? I mean, could Sherwood be the answer to those questions? If Bolduc doesn't live up to the hype, they're looking for a plan B already. Patrick Laine's absence, and I don't think personally, just my own opinion today, that I don't think Laine has a future with the Montreal Canadiens, that maybe this is the guy. Maybe this is the guy that can come in and be that option for this team, because he's playing top 6 minutes. He's on a line with Besser in Vancouver. And as I pointed out, he's on 12 goals in 27 games. But I think it falls onto what you had mentioned in passing there, that in a buyer's market, you're buying at peak value. So
Exactly.
that's a little concerning. But what about that angle of Bolduc, potential, the absence of Patrick Laine eventually, that Sherwood could be the guy that could fill those slots?
Yeah, I mean, Sherwood also getting second power play minutes. It definitely helps as well in terms of the offensive production and the
Sure.
confidence and whatnot. I feel like it would be a pigeonhole kind of moment for the Canadians,
Mhm.
where I understand you're looking to bolster your bottom six, but is this really like, if you look across the league, you look at the top teams in the NHL and you look at their bottom six, a lot of these guys, a lot of these teams don't have kind of these trap players, right? Like,
Right.
let's look at some of the top teams in this league right now. Like, for example, I like the Boston Bruins, but I feel like the Bruins really went ham on trying to fill out their bottom six, and they throw a lot of money at them.
Mm.
Right now, it's fine because they're a team with an older core and they're looking to compete, right? But you see how they've gone about remodeling their lines, and you have Tanner Janot, who's signed a pretty solid contract, who's on a third line, but that line is being kind of pushed forward by Fraser Minton coming out party, right? Like that really kind of was one of the major elements. You look at, for example, the Vegas Golden Knights. Their bottom six is relatively cheap. Right now,
Mm.
Thomas Hurdle is playing on a third line by design. They have Brett Houghton playing with Mitch Marner and Mark Stone. But after that, Brandon Saad, Pavel Dorofeyev, Keegan Kolasar, Colton Sissons, Cole Reinhardt, very cheap options. And even with the players that they have, out with injury, William Karlsson is the only one that you would consider in there to be a third line player, and that's by excess, right? So normally he would be a top six player for most of these teams. That's what I'm getting at. That's where, when I look at like the Colorado Avalanche, Victor Olofsson, Nichushkin is playing on the third line to even things out, but normally it would be Ross Colton, Jack Drury, Parker Kelly, Kiviranta, Bardakov. These guys are guys that are in their situations, and
Mhm.
they're not taking up uh, a lot of salary. Logan O'Connor, same concept. So I'm always weary about giving higher end contracts to middle six or bottom six players. I've always been of the mind, you can draft those, you can add those when it's time to contend, but I feel like the Canadians, and rightfully I've heard this, the Canadians have been keeping their prime assets for some of the bigger fish that they're expecting to show up on the trade market. But I just
Yeah.
feel like Sherwood in style fits, Sherwood the asset does not. And I think that's where I'm a little concerned. Yes, in the immediate moment, the emotional idea is, yeah, of course, bring him over. Like, this is exactly what the Canadians need. They need a spark. They need a trade. Let's get something going. I just don't know if that's the play. I don't know that he would be able to fill that
Mhm.
void that the Canadiens have. And then after that, you're left with him, Gallagher, and Anderson all
Oh,
signed for next year on your bottom six. And imagine he signs a contract with Montreal
ex
that's 5 million for long term. You would have 17 million between those three players. I would be weary. I feel like it would be an unnecessary risk. So if they aren't going to extend him, I don't see the short-term value of sacrificing a second round pick to go and get him. Now, if the cost becomes lesser than that, and the Canadiens are banking on having him around and helping him with the young players this year to bridge the gap, I can understand it. I can understand it. The My only worry is that I feel like the Canucks are drumming up a market for him right now that would make getting Sherwood for less than a third round pick or less impossible. I think they're gonna be able to squeeze a second round pick for him.
You mentioned earlier, some red flags, right? Looking at a player that made his NHL debut with Anaheim in 2018. Here we are now, obviously in 2025, looking forward to turning the calendar into 2026. In the hypothetical world that may not exist, that Kiefer Sherwood, goes to another team, whether it's Montreal or not, that would be his fifth NHL team. Is that one of the red flags? We talking about a guy who has bounced around, whether from the Anaheim Ducks to the Colorado Avalanche to Nashville to Vancouver and now to another team? Or is that just the
Mhm.
life of a role player, a depth player, a guy with edge that everybody looks for, but the shelf life isn't very long or very stable?
Yeah, I don't. It's difficult, right? So you had, yeah, you had an interesting conversation happen on Donnie and Daly. Rick Dhaliwal brought up that the Vancouver Canucks were scouting the Montreal Ottawa game and presented the idea of potentially the Canadiens and Vancouver talking about Zachary Balzuc, who, let's call a spade, doesn't have the favor of Martin St. Louis right now.
No.
I don't necessarily think that Balzuc is on the move just yet. I think they would try to get him going before trying to sell low on him, unless Vancouver provides an offer. But the idea of a Balzuc Sherwood trade, I don't necessarily see it happen. What
Huh.
I've heard is Minnesota is also very interested in getting a guy like Sherwood. He very much fits their style, and that's a team that's in a situation where they're underperforming that could use a Sherwood because they're not in a they're very much in a we would like to be competitive now window, whereas the Canadians are still in the midst of their rebuild and trying to get to the right level. So if we go back to what Jeff Gordon said at the golf tournament, they're in an era where they can be picky, and I feel like giving up significant assets for a Sherwood, I don't know that that would necessarily make sense. I don't know that that would necessarily move the needle for the Canadians on the long term, where they should be making trades not for the short term, but for the long term. I like
Mm.
Sherwood, but I just feel like the way that he plays, the way that he's being utilized in Vancouver, he would not get that in Montreal.
Right. I mean, yeah, he's not supplanting a Demidov, for example, right? I mean,
No.
in that situation, like he's playing with Kampf and Brock Besser in Vancouver on that second line, as you mentioned earlier, right? Second wave of the power play with Evander Kane out in Vancouver. And so we'll see. I mean, he signed as a free agent on a 2-year deal with the Canucks, signed as a free agent with Nashville, signed as a free agent with the Colorado Avalanche. So not a lot of precedent in terms of what his value has been on the open market. He's gotten to the market and then signed as a free agent. So for me, to quote the great Randy Jackson of American Idol fame, it's a no for me, dog. Final word on Kiefer Sherwood. Feel free to quote
I would
your
keep
favorite celebrity if you want, but for me, it's a no, dog.
I would keep an eye on it. I feel like a team like Minnesota would be the kind of team to go for it. I feel like they would be. I think that whenever Montreal is included in these names, there's always a little bit of a interest generating machine by doing that.
Yeah.
And so I wouldn't be surprised if that's what's happening here. I would see the Canadians inquiring, obviously wanting to check.
Sure.
It's
But more as
important
a
to
fit
note.
for Montreal right now. Like I can see another team looking at him as a rental player for sure, but in
Mhm.
Montreal as a fit today, rental or
I see him.
otherwise.
I see him as a stylistic fit. I just don't see him as a fit as an asset. And I
Yeah.
think when you factor in the salary demands as well, I'm a little concerned because when you sign a player that plays that style, that's peaking at the right time and is getting good utilization, I I err on the side of caution with these things. I don't think the Canadians are necessarily at a point where they need to make these kinds of risks, especially if the player isn't 100% committed to staying and doing
Yeah.
so in a way that would be affordable. If he's asking for 5 million in Vancouver, where they gave him his first shot, like I don't know that Kiefer Sherwood is going to get an average ice time in Montreal of 17 minutes and 40 seconds, right? Which is something you need to
Yeah.
keep into consideration when you see his utilization, right? I
Exactly.
don't think
Yeah.
that's happening. I don't think I'm
Yeah.
playing him over a Demidov or a
No.
Slavkovsky or a Caulfield, and you know. Uh, uh, it just seems like there is a whole list of reasons why regression would be expected once he's traded. Whole litany of reasons. And I
Hmm.
just again feel like this is the kind of player that a contending team drops a second round pick for or more, not a team that's reaching the next level of a rebuild and looking to add, you know, character pieces to their core that are going to be able to bring value to the team.
Right.
And I just don't feel like, given his asking price, given the clear red flags that we pointed out, that would be the way to go.
There's Marco D'Amico with RG Media. He joins TSN 690 in the morning show every Wednesday for Habs Breakfast. Shout out to all of our sponsors, cheapesttshirts.ca, McLean's Pub at Maison Publique, McLean's on Peel Street. Will be there live December 23rd ahead of the Canadiens and Boston Bruins. If you're looking for the best in your home alarm and home security, you can trust Cabletel, cabletel.com. They've been a proud sponsor of this show and been serving the Quebec and Eastern Ontario market for over 20 years, and the best in the real estate business. It's why she has the Remax Platine designation. It's the great Catherine Prince. Looking to buy or sell your home, looking for a home evaluation. If you're contemplating putting it on the market, you can trust Catherine Prince at Catherine Prince and her website. All the details available on our website. Marco, thanks as always, man.
Always a pleasure, guys. Everyone have a good day.